So hi, welcome. I'm trying something a little bit different with this video, more of a personal discussion type thing in a different environment too. In a very unplanned way, I'm at home today, not in the office. It's the weekend, and I also couldn't find my camera when I was in the office yesterday. What I want to do with these videos is actually try something different, try a different tone, rather than the how to deal with stress or how to cope with change videos that I make for clients and the audience out there. Something a little bit more that gives an insight into what it's actually like to be a psychologist. What do I do? How do I do it? It's an experiment. It's an experiment that only occurred to me this week. I'll be really open. I was in Dublin Airport, waiting for yet another delayed flight, and I noticed that my YouTube algorithm, what was being suggested to me by YouTube, was full of really interesting first-person personal vlogs. I was really enjoying these, getting an insight into someone's life, what they do, how they do it, where they go. And so I thought, let me try something like this and see how it goes. So I'll be interested to hear what you think. Let me know down below if you want to see more of this, or if you've got questions you think I could answer in a future video. Now, I wanted to talk today about what it's like to take my own medicine. What do I mean by this? I'm a psychologist who really emphasizes well-being at work and the importance of putting our well-being front and center to help us with being productive and being effective. So what is it like when I have to take my own advice about my well-being? Let's get back a little bit. I returned from a wonderful holiday in Japan over a week ago, and I returned with a bit of a sniffle. And the sniffle developed into quite a nasty head cold. By the end of the week, my partner said to me, "You should probably take a COVID test. This sounds quite nasty." I wasn't keen to do that, very illogically, but because a few weeks ago I had my COVID booster, and I mistakenly believed that this had enveloped me in some kind of antiviral shield. Of course it hadn't. Of course I took the test, and of course it was positive. So I slunk back into bed and spent the next sort of 5 days really suffering. It could have been a lot worse, and I think if I hadn't had the booster, I probably would have had a much worse experience of COVID this time round. I'm really lucky. This is only the second time that I'm aware that I've had COVID. So I want to put that in context. I know I'm really lucky. This led to a couple of things for me. One was, as someone who runs his own business, work is piling up in one direction. I'm in bed and really unable to do a lot of what I really wanted to do. Now my career, my coaching career, has had a stream of clients in it for whom our focus has been, how do you know when enough is enough? How do you know when to put some boundaries in place? What is self-care for you? And this began to go through my mind as I found myself sitting up in bed with my laptop trying to work. It really came home when I realized I'd fallen asleep sitting up in bed with my laptop open in front of me with a particularly boring spreadsheet. I was trying to do too much while ill. And so therefore I had to fall back on my own advice, which was, if you're ill, you need to invest in a recovery. You need to take the time to rest. And so I did. And it was very frustrating. And that's the nature of being sick. It's not fun. And so the workload piled up. And by the time I managed to get back to work, I was finally testing negative and finally feeling a little bit human. And I will say a negative test does give you a bit of a boost. The end is in sight. And I felt quite overwhelmed. And so I did what I would say to a client. I sat down with a pen and paper and just made a list of what absolutely must be done. Not everything that could be done, and really prioritize that. And that is itself very uncomfortable. It's a point I frequently make, that if you're prioritizing effectively, it is by its nature uncomfortable because you're doing one thing and not doing all of the other things. And that can feel a little bit iffy, a little bit icky. Why am I not doing everything? Because we can't. And so I worked through those priorities and managed to get myself not back to where I wanted to be, but at least having met some of my most urgent commitments and then signposted to everyone else. COVID, timeout, I'm not going to be able to do everything. And it really reminded me of the importance of thinking about the the longer game, the bigger picture, that while something seems really urgent in the here and now, you know what's more important is my health and my capacity to do a good job next week and not just meet these urgent requests right now. So that was a little insight into taking some of my own medicine and following some of my own advice. Now, this meant that I was able to get back to work, probably sooner than if I had tried to work all the way through this. And I was able to go to Dublin to do a team development session for one of my clients over there. And I have no doubt in my mind that it went a lot better than it would have if I'd rocked up with all of those horrible symptoms and all of those horrible feelings and, yeah, not being my best self. Now, this point about following your own advice is one that I recently discussed on the podcast, actually, when I was asked in a workshop by a client. It was a productivity themed workshop. Do you practice what you preach? Which is a terrible question to answer. For one reason, I hope we don't preach. But secondly, do you need to be a master practitioner of all of the things that you work on with your clients? And I would argue, no. And that was a good reminder for me. I am not the best patient. I am not the most patient person when ill. And I really feel like I'm an exception to that and should keep going. And it reminded me that I'm human, like all of my clients. And it's important to take that time out to be able to recover. But it did enable me to dip into the toolkit of, okay, so if this was a client, what would we be discussing? We'd be discussing getting clear on what must be done. We'd be discussing a phased return to work. We'd be talking about acceptance of the fact that it's not perfect, but it's good enough. Acceptance of the discomfort of not being able to fire on all four cylinders. And also managing others' expectations and putting up some boundaries and also being realistic about what can be done. So I found myself then on a return journey, as I say, waiting for this delayed flight. You know, it's easier to note the ones that aren't delayed at the moment, but this gave me time to think about the week, the 2 weeks really, and it seemed like a very long time since coming back from Japan and the high of being on holidays. But I went through the full cycle of the return to work, the not being able to do a great job, and then, yeah, getting back to being me. So what I'd like to do going forward with these is, yeah, give you a little bit of an insight into what a typical week looks like for me, bust some myths and misunderstandings about what psychologists actually do in the workplace, and then answer some really frequently asked questions that I get professionally and socially when you talk about being a psychologist. I'll be honest, there's sometimes when I don't really use the P word when I describe what I do because I haven't got the energy to deal with all the inevitable questions. But I'm really proud of my professional identity, and so I'm usually happy to talk about it. But there are some really common misunderstandings and some really frequently asked questions. So I'd like to use this to answer those. And of course, any questions that you can think of that I might be able to answer, I'll do that in future videos. So maybe let's take a minute to talk a tiny bit about what I actually did in Dublin. It was a team development session for a team I hadn't worked with before. And the reason I want to talk about it, obviously maintaining confidentiality, is just maybe to manage people's expectations about what team development looks like. I am not a fan of taking teams up the side of a mountain or blindfolding them and making them do parlor tricks or trust exercises. There's lots of ways that we can build interpersonal relationships in a team and increase team functioning that don't involve making people feel awkward or indeed getting them to move around the place or go outside and get wet and cold. We focused on a few things, primarily helping people build their own self-awareness. What is it that makes me, and how do I like to be on a team? And then being able to signpost that stuff and communicate it effectively to those on the team. That stuff we often don't figure out for quite some time when exposed to others. And let's be honest, if your working day consists of back-to-back meetings, you don't feel like you've got a lot of time to learn about these people as individuals, but more as the role they occupy or the position they have in the team. So taking some time to communicate that. I use the analogy of an owner's manual. When you buy a big piece of kit washing machine or the camera I'm looking at right now. It comes with a manual. How do I get the most out of this piece of machinery? Now, whether or not you read that cover to cover and absorb it all, there's useful information in there. So imagine if you had an owner's manual you could give to other people. This is how to get the best out of me. That's a little bit of what we did last week, getting people to think about how they like to be at work and how they would like to work with others, and then take time to communicate it and talk it through. Not in a series of demands, you must treat me this way, but more, this is how I like to be, what's your approach? How are we similar? How are we different? And then a big part around building psychological safety in the team. This is a really interesting concept, and it's an evidence-based one, where we're able to increase the functioning or the effectiveness of the team if people feel it's a safe place to share their perspective, or as the official definition goes, where it's safe to take interpersonal risks. Now, that could look like speaking up in a meeting, sharing a minority view, pointing out risks and issues, or even holding your hand up to say you've made a mistake. Where psychological safety is higher, it means that you feel safe doing that, knowing that you won't get attacked or blamed, but you will be confident that the topic will be discussed. Not who do we blame for this, but how do we deal with this, for example. And there's some great ways of building that in a team. You can't do it to people, no more than you can take someone into a room and, motivate them. You have to create an environment where people can feel that safety. And it has lots of benefits around communication and provision of support and knowledge management and overall team effectiveness. So I felt it was a really good investment of our time together. And I would close this part by saying that this is not, task complete with team development. This is opening the beginning of ongoing development for the team so they can get to know one another and build these ways of working into the time they spend together. So I don't sort of dip them in magic ink. You are now a fully developed team, but give them pointers as to things they can continue to do as they work together. And then I left them to it and went back to Dublin Airport and got inspired to make this video. So we've come kind of full circle. I'm going to leave it there for today, but to let you know that since I started thinking about making this, I did get inspired to address some other topics. So I'm going to do a few more of these. I've got a few plans and I want to answer a few questions. If you found it useful, let me know. If you've got specific questions about what it's like to be a psychologist, let me know. Use that comment section down below. So let's leave it there for today. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.